A former Navy SEAL named Jake retreats to the solitude of the Cascades, guiding hiking tours to escape the ghosts of war until he finds a lost, injured man in the wilderness. The stranger turns out to be Robert Matthias, a long-presumed dead Marine commander whose disappearance was buried by the government. As Jake shelters and protects him, old truths resurface, bonds of brotherhood are reignited, and a forgotten hero is finally welcomed home. Welcome to my channel. I used to be known as Jacob West. Folks in my old unit called me North Star, on account of the way I could find my bearings in the dark, even with bullets singing through the air. But those days are long behind me. These days, I go by Jake, and I live where the mountains brush the sky, a patch of solitude deep in the Cascades, somewhere north of Spokane, Washington. I'm 43 now. Spent nearly 2 decades as a Navy SEAL, bouncing from one hot zone to the next. Fallujah, Kandahar, Mogadishu, you name it. When I finally left that world behind, I didn't retire so much as disappear. Civilization was too loud, too complicated. The woods, though? They don't ask questions. They don't care if you check every exit or wake up in a cold sweat at 3:07 a.m. They just stand tall, steady, eternal. These days I lead hiking tours for folks who want to dip a toe in wilderness without getting eaten by it. Usually just weekend warriors and retired couples looking for Instagram sunsets. Last fall, late October, I was guiding a small group, 7 in all, through a narrow trail that snaked along the side of Elkstone Ridge. The air was crisp, pine-scented, with the kind of silence you only get after the first frost. Birds don't sing much then. Even the wind tiptoes through the branches. That's when I saw it. A shift in the trail. Mud slung in an unnatural arc, branches snapped low, not high, like someone had stumbled, maybe fallen. The soil told a story if you knew how to read it. And I did. You folks go on ahead to the lookout, I told them. 10 minutes. I'll catch up. My cousin Brandon, who'd flown out from Cleveland for this little escape, cocked an eyebrow. What is it? Probably nothing, I said, already veering off trail. But I've got to be sure. The others hesitated, murmured, then moved on. Brandon watched me go, concern written all over his face, but he didn't argue. He knew I wasn't one to chase shadows without a reason. 50 yards in, I found him. An older man, 70s, maybe, collapsed under a crooked lodgepole pine. His coat was torn, one boot missing, his skin pale as moonlight. He was barely conscious, cradling something tight against his chest. I knelt beside him, checked his vitals. Weak, but there. Dehydration. Exposure. But nothing broken, no obvious trauma. He'd taken a spill, most likely. Maybe lost for a day or more. He clutched an old military cap, threadbare but clean. The kind issued decades ago. His fingers, though trembling, wouldn't let it go. I built a quick shelter from my emergency kit, laid out thermal blankets, and radioed back to Brandon. Got a man down, I said. Probably lost, definitely in trouble. Lead the group back to the trailhead. I'm staying the night. There was silence. Then, Jake, are you sure? Man could be dangerous. Nights dropping below freezing. He won't last 4 hours alone. I've got this. Jake, this ain't Fallujah. I stared at the flickering flame I just coaxed to life. No, I said. It's colder. By the time the sun dipped behind the ridge, the wind had turned sharp, carrying the smell of snow. I gave him my rations, shared my water, wrapped him in the good blanket. I took the lighter one. Old habit. Around 4 a.m., he stirred. His eyes, hazy before, cleared for just a second as they fixed on mine. There was recognition there. Not of me, but of something familiar. You were in Mosul? He rasped. It wasn't a question. It was a knowing. I froze. That wasn't something a casual observer would ask. Only someone who'd seen it, too. Rest, I said quietly. You're not alone anymore. His eyelids fluttered shut. But I knew then, this wasn't just some lost hiker. Something deeper was unraveling. Something I hadn't expected to find buried in these mountains. And the way the old man clenched that cap like it was the last piece of himself? Well, I'd seen that before. Once, in a different war. Once, in a mirror. By dawn, the fire had burned low, and the cold had crept into my bones. I hadn't slept, not really. You don't when you're in protector mode. It's something the Navy bred into us, this vigilance that hums under your skin even when your eyes are shut. The old man stirred again. This time, when he looked at me, there was more awareness behind his eyes. He sat up slow, like every muscle had to be reminded how to work. I handed him a tin mug of coffee I'd boiled over the coals. His hands trembled as he took it, but he drank deep. Should probably apologize, he said, his voice like gravel scraped across dry leaves. Can't remember my name. Been out here a while, I think. No need for names yet, I told him. You're safe. That's what matters. But he shook his head, glancing down at his jacket, brushing off dirt until a small chain glinted underneath. Dog tags, partially obscured by grime, but still legible once the sunlight caught them. Robert Matthias, 1st Recon. It hit me then. The name. Like an old bell tolling from somewhere deep in memory. Robert Matthias. I remembered reading about him in a classified briefing back in 2011. A Marine Recon Commander, high-value target recovery mission. Team Echo. Mission went south somewhere in the Hindu Kush. 12 went in. None came out. No recovery, no reports. Just silence. The kind that governments like. The kind that keeps the paperwork clean. You need medical help, I said, masking what I just realized. My cabin's about 3 miles from here. Think you can make it? He nodded, slow but sure. The kind of nod only a soldier gives, one that says hurt or not. I'll move. The hike back was grueling. I had to catch him more than once when he stumbled, but he never asked to stop. Every so often, he'd glance at the tree line like something might be watching. That kind of hyper-awareness doesn't fade. Combat imprints it deep. When we finally crested the ridge and my cabin came into view, a squat wooden thing with a tin roof and a smoke chimney, I saw something flicker in his expression. Maybe relief. Maybe something harder to name. But he followed me inside without a word, and when I laid him down in the spare room, he didn't ask where he was. He just exhaled, deep and long, and let himself rest. I didn't call the authorities. I didn't patch through to search and rescue. I'd seen enough missions scrubbed and soldiers forgotten to know that sometimes calling the wrong people does more harm than help. Instead, I fed him, gave him clean clothes, and offered the only thing a ghost of war really needs, quiet. That night, around 2 a.m., he screamed. Full body panic. Tangled in sheets, yelling coordinates over and over again. They left us, he shouted. The evac was wrong. We were a click north. Don't go back. You'll never make it. I didn't touch him. I just sat in the doorway and spoke low, steady. You're not there anymore. You're safe now. It's over. Eventually, his breathing slowed, and he fell back into a fitful sleep. I stayed there the rest of the night. The next morning, while he was in the shower, I made a call. Not to the local sheriff. To Deke Ramirez, a SEAL brother who now worked intel at the Pentagon. I asked one question. Whatever happened to Recon Team Echo? He didn't answer right away. Just silence. Then finally, that file's been closed a long time, Jake. Officially, all Kia. Unofficially, there were rumors. One survivor. Brain damage. Escaped a black site but disappeared before recovery. They assumed he died in the wild. Well, I said, he didn't. You're saying, he's with you? I didn't say that, I replied. Deke caught on fast. Keep him safe. If it's him, a lot of brass are gonna want this buried. But some of us still remember what he did out there. When I hung up, I stared out at the trees swaying in the wind. The truth was becoming clear. Matthias hadn't just survived. He'd been abandoned. And now? He was sitting in my kitchen, eating oatmeal like any other tired old man, except he wasn't just any old man. He was a ghost that someone out there had buried alive. And I wasn't about to let them do it again. Over the next couple of days, I didn't press him with questions. I've learned the hard way that sometimes silence is the best space you can offer someone who's carrying a past heavier than most people could imagine. Matthias, or Mats, as I started calling him, mostly kept to himself, watched the sunrise from the porch, folded his borrowed clothes like he was still in the service. He flinched at sudden noises, refused to turn his back to any door. Didn't ask for details about me, but I knew he was watching just the same. The thing that struck me most wasn't how lost he seemed. It was how instinctively he still acted like a Marine. Even in disorientation, there was discipline. That evening, after dinner, he paused by the American flag I'd mounted on a pole outside the cabin. For a moment, he stood straight. His hand started to rise, half a salute, then dropped before it made it halfway. He turned and walked back inside without saying a word. That night, it happened again. The shouting. The flashback. I found him on the floor beside the bed, soaked in sweat, mumbling like he was back in some cave or tunnel halfway across the world. They said wait for extraction, wait for backup. Never came. We were off-grid, too far south. They left us. His voice cracked on the last word. This time, I crouched a little closer, not touching him, but close enough he'd hear my voice. You made it, Mats. You're not there anymore. You made it out. His eyes slowly focused, like someone swimming up from the bottom of a dark lake. Then, almost like a child embarrassed by tears, he muttered, "Sorry. Bad night." "I've had a few myself," I said. In the morning, he didn't mention it. But he ate more. Moved a little easier. I knew the healing had started. That afternoon, I called Deke again. I needed more. "What's the real story behind Echo?" I asked. He hesitated, then told me. Operation Black Ember classified mission. Retrieval of sensitive intelligence assets in Taliban-held territory. Matthias was the CO, a lieutenant colonel. His team hit a kill zone. Intel was bad. They got caught between two converging forces. 11 Marines died in that canyon. Matthias didn't. He got out. Barely. They suspected he was captured. Reports hinted he escaped a holding compound in northern Pakistan in 2015, but by then, no one could confirm it. His own mind had fractured. When a witness in a village described a ghost soldier wandering barefoot, muttering coordinates and commands, the military dismissed it. Too dangerous to acknowledge. Too messy to explain. So they left the record sealed. Buried. Why'd they bury it? I asked. Because having a commanding officer survive after the op was declared a total loss undermines the whole thing, Deke replied. He comes back, they have to explain the lies, the screw-ups, the botched extraction. Brass doesn't like being wrong. I looked out the cabin window. Metz was chopping firewood, focused and precise. They'd left a soldier to rot in a memory hole because the paperwork didn't like what he represented. But he wasn't paperwork. He was real. That evening, while we sat outside watching the sun burn gold across the treetops, Metz finally spoke up. "They ever tell you that it's not the dying that gets you, it's the surviving?" I glanced over, not speaking. He continued. "They left us. All of us. When I got out. I didn't know who I was. I didn't trust anyone. Kept hearing their voices. Thought I was being hunted. Hell, maybe I was." He tapped a finger on the side of his head. "Mind plays tricks on you when all you've got is silence and the ghosts." I nodded. "You remembered your name, though." "Not at first. Took years. Some memories come back like thunder. Some are quiet. But they always come." I looked him dead in the eyes. "And what do you want now?" He looked at the forest for a long moment. "I want to know that what we did mattered. That they didn't all die for nothing." And just like that, I knew what I had to do. It was time someone else knew he was alive. Time someone acknowledged the man who never left his brothers behind, even when everyone else had. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed by the fire, going over every possibility in my head. I knew that if word got out the wrong way, Mats could be treated as a liability. Or worse, a cover-up waiting to be silenced. But I also knew there were still good people out there, vets, brass, medics, who cared about the truth. So I made one more call. Not to Deke this time, but to someone I hadn't spoken to in over a decade, Colonel Sarah Blake, retired. She wasn't just any officer. She'd been Echo's liaison in command before her retirement, ran point from stateside when they went dark. She had clout. More importantly, she had a conscience. When she answered, her voice was cautious. "Jake." "I found him," I said. "Matthias. He's alive." The silence on the line lasted a full 10 seconds. "Are you sure?" she asked finally, her voice cracking just slightly. His face. His tags. His memories. He remembered Fallujah. Coordinates. Details no civilian would ever know. "Where is he?" "Safe. For now." "Jake," she said, "you have no idea what this means. We tried to find him. We never stopped looking, not really. But after the 5th year, the money dried up, the approvals stopped. He became a ghost in the system. I told her I wasn't looking for press or medals. I just wanted her to know he was out there. Healing." She asked for my coordinates. I hesitated. She said, "Jake, I'll bring only those I trust. No press. No brass. Just the core. He deserves his name back. His honor." By the time the sun had crept over the ridge the next morning, I knew I'd done the right thing. Mats was on the porch sipping weak coffee when the first vehicle turned up my gravel road. He heard it before I did. Stopped mid-sip. His eyes scanned the tree line like muscle memory had just flipped a switch. Then the first olive-drab Humvee rolled into view. Not fast. Not aggressive. Just steady, deliberate. Behind it came 2 more. Then a final truck carrying men in dress blues. Marines. Matt stood slowly. Didn't move toward them. Didn't run. Just stood, watching. The lead vehicle stopped, and a man in full uniform stepped out. Lieutenant Colonel James Harrington, Broad shoulders, silver leaf insignia, the posture of a man who never forgot the rules. He walked up to the porch and looked Mats in the eye. Then, crisp and clear, he snapped a salute. "Welcome home, sir," he said. And every single Marine behind him followed suit. It was like time stopped. Mats didn't move at first. His arms hung awkwardly at his sides. But then, slowly, his right hand twitched upward. The salute was shaky, incomplete. But it was there. Recognition. Return. A younger Marine stepped forward then. No more than 25. Nervous as hell. He cleared his throat. "Sir, I'm Corporal David Jensen. My dad was Staff Sergeant William Jensen. He served under you. Said you dragged him out after the blast. You saved him, sir." Mats looked at him, blinking hard. "Jensen," he whispered. "Big guy. Called his rifle Cindy. Always carried hot sauce in his pack." Corporal Jensen's mouth fell open, and tears welled in his eyes. "Yes, sir. That's him." Matt smiled. It was thin, barely there. But it was real. He told me he had a kid. Kept a picture in his helmet. "That was me," Jensen said, voice trembling. 10 years old. He died last year, but he always said you were the reason he got to come home. The emotion in the clearing was like static electricity, thick, invisible, humming between every living thing. Then the medical team approached. "Colonel," the doctor said gently, "we'd like to take you to Walter Reed for care. You have an emergency transponder embedded. When Jake brought you close enough to a satellite, it pinged our system. We've been trying to locate you for years." Mats looked at me. His eyes said what words couldn't. He was asking if I trusted them. I nodded once. He exhaled. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's go." The Marines didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They simply stood straighter. Because a lost man had come home. And every one of them knew the price of that journey. They called it Operation Homebound. That's what the letter said, anyway. The one that arrived a week after the convoy pulled away from my cabin with Matthias riding in the back seat, flanked by men who hadn't stopped believing. The envelope bore the Marine Corps seal. Inside was a formal commendation addressed to me, thanking me for providing aid and shelter to a lost soldier. It acknowledged my discretion, courage, and brotherhood under non-combat conditions, which is the military's fancy way of saying you did right when no one else would. I read the letter once, then folded it up and put it in the drawer next to the compass I carried in Iraq, and the photo of my squad before we lost Riley. Recognition had never been the point. 3 mornings later, just as the mountain fog was lifting, I heard tires on gravel again. I stepped out on the porch with a coffee mug in hand, expecting delivery trucks or maybe Brandon dropping in unannounced. What I saw instead made me freeze. A line of Marines. Not in combat gear. Not in Humvees. Dress blues. Perfectly pressed. Buttons polished to mirror shine. They stood shoulder to shoulder along the length of my drive, all the way down to the trailhead. No officers barking orders. No ceremonial music. Just silence. And presence. One by one, they approached the cabin. Each placed a small American flag into the earth along the path to my door. Then they saluted. And stepped back. I didn't say a word. Couldn't. My throat was too tight to form a sound. The last man in line was Corporal Jensen. Same kid who told Matthias his father never stopped telling stories about that canyon. He stepped up, saluted like his soul was behind it, then placed something more than a flag. A photo. 2 men, arms around each other in desert fatigues. One was Jensen's father. The other was Matthias. Taken God knows when. But there was fire in their eyes. Brotherhood. Corporal Jensen set the frame into the soil with care, then stepped back and stood at attention. When the last flag was planted, they turned as one and left. No speeches, no pomp, just a wordless message that said, "We remember. We honor. We never forgot." I stood there until the sun dipped behind the ridge. The flags fluttered in the breeze like whispers from the past. Something inside me, something hard and coiled for a long time, loosened. And for the first time in years, I smiled. Later that night, my secure phone line buzzed. The kind of number only 3 people on this planet still had. I answered. The voice on the other end was Deke. He remembered the rest today, he said. I didn't speak. Just listened. Full recall. Mission details. Coordinates. Names of his men. Captors. Everything. That's rare, I finally said. Doctors are calling it remarkable, Deke replied. But I told them, it's not remarkable. It's Marine Standard issue. I chuckled softly, my eyes still on the flags outside. How's he doing? Stronger every day, he said. Asked about you. I nodded. Tell him I said. He's not forgotten. There was a pause. Then Deke said, "Some people never really come home from war. But sometimes, someone brings them back." That line stuck with me long after the call ended. I stood on my porch until midnight, watching those flags, reminded that even in the silence of the mountains, some actions echo louder than any words. The days that followed felt quieter than usual, though nothing had changed on the surface. Same trees, same wind whistling down the slopes, same routine to chop wood, check trail gear, make campfire coffee. But inside, something was different. Like a weight had been lifted, but the imprint still lingered in the shape of my chest. I found myself looking down the road more often, half expecting to hear those tires again, or see a figure emerge from the trees. Of course, I knew better. Matthias was gone, taken to the place he needed to be, where his mind could find peace, and the world could finally acknowledge the debt it owed him. Still, I missed him. Not in the way you miss an old friend. More like missing a part of yourself you didn't realize you'd lost, until it walked out of your forest wearing your spare jacket and saluting strangers like the war had ended only yesterday. A week later, I hiked back to the exact place where I first found him, under that crooked pine with the collapsed soil and the signs no civilian would have noticed. The ground was damp from snowmelt, and the wind was colder now, but the place hadn't changed much. There, near the edge of the trail, someone had left a marker. A bronze plaque staked gently into the earth, with words etched into it so cleanly it almost felt like a whisper. At this sight, one who was forgotten was finally called home. I crouched there for a long time, my fingers tracing the cool metal. And I thought about all the others. The ones who never made it back. The ones who came home in body but left something behind that never caught up. The ones who wandered like Matthias, not because they were broken, but because the world never gave them space to heal. On the way back, I stopped at the trailhead and noticed someone had placed a small metal tag near the sign-in box. It wasn't official. It wasn't big. But it said something more than rules and reminders ever could. Just 3 words. No one forgotten. Later that evening, Brandon called me. My cousin. He'd been quiet ever since that day we parted ways at the ridge. "Jake," he said, "those guys that came to your cabin. They were Marines, weren't they?" "Yeah. You ever going to tell me what that was all about?" I thought about it. About everything I could say. Everything I couldn't. Finally, I answered, "Not my story to tell, Brandon. But let's just say, sometimes the past knocks. And if you're lucky, you open the door." He was silent for a while. "Does it ever get easier?" he asked. "What?" "The stuff you've seen. The stuff you carry." I leaned back in my chair, listening to the wind scratch across the eaves. "No," I said honestly. "But sometimes, someone shows up that reminds you why you carried it in the first place." Before he hung up, he added something I didn't expect. "I'm proud of you, man." That meant more than I let on. Because truth be told, I'd spent so long hiding from the world that I forgot how much one man's actions could still ripple across it. Matthias reminded me. About 10 days after the Marines left, a package arrived. No return address. Just my name, written in neat block letters. Inside, wrapped in protective cloth, was a folded American flag, the kind handed out at military funerals. Tucked into the folds was a note. "Jake." This belonged to Sergeant Eli Graves. He was the last man I carried out before everything went black. I found this flag in a cave years later. Thought I'd lost it. Thought I'd lost everything. But you reminded me that some people still stand guard, even in peace. Keep this. For every soldier that didn't come home, and every brother who carried them anyway. Mats. I sat down hard. I hadn't cried in years. But that day, I came close. That flag wasn't just cloth and memory. It was a bridge between what we did and what we lived through. A symbol of sacrifice and survival. I placed it in a wooden case on the mantel. Above it, I mounted an old compass. Mine. The one that once saved my unit when our GPS failed in Basra. I figured it belonged there, next to a reminder that sometimes, being lost doesn't mean you're gone. The wind shifted that morning came from the north, sharp and restless. I just stepped out to split some logs when I noticed a visitor at the edge of the trail. Not military. Not family. Just a woman in her late 50s, bundled in a navy coat, eyes scanning the tree line like she was searching for something she hadn't seen in decades. I approached slowly. "You lost?" She shook her head. "No. I think I found what I came for." She introduced herself as Margaret Graves, sister of Eli, Sergeant Eli Graves. The name from the flag. I stood still, not sure what to say. "They told me he died in that canyon," she said. "But we never got details. Never found his body." I nodded toward the cabin. "I think I have something of his." Inside, I handed her the folded flag and the note from Matthias. She didn't cry, not right away. Just held it to her chest like something sacred. I thought we were the only ones who remembered him, she whispered. You weren't, I said. She stayed for coffee. Told me about Eli's guitar playing, his terrible cooking, how he used to whistle old jazz tunes while fixing her bike when they were kids. For the first time, Eli Graves was more than a name in a file. He was real. And for the first time in years, someone got to carry him home. Winter arrived quietly. One morning I woke up to find the trail blanketed in white, the kind of snow that silences the world and makes even the pine trees look reverent. Everything felt still, like the mountain itself was remembering. I hadn't heard from Matthias since the flag. Didn't expect to. The man had earned his peace. But I got updates, subtle, quiet ones. A call from Deke here. A nod from a Pentagon friend there. Mats was rebuilding. Remembering. They said he'd even started speaking to other soldiers again. Some who hadn't opened up in years were opening up to him. Man carries that kind of weight, Deke told me. When he speaks, it lands different. I believed it. The story had reached more people than I expected. Quietly, through the right channels. Veterans were coming forward, sharing their stories. Some were finding names for their ghosts. Others were just relieved to know they weren't alone. That was the real gift Matthias gave them. Not survival, but testimony. Proof that someone could walk through hell and still find their way back. Sometimes that's all people need. Spring came late that year. By April, the trail was passable again, and I'd started leading small groups into the forest, locals mostly. I didn't talk about what happened last fall, not unless someone asked. And even then, I just said, sometimes you find someone who needs a way home. One morning, near the overlook where I'd first spotted the signs of the landslide, I saw something new. A small wooden bench had been installed near the edge of the ridge. Freshly varnished, simple. Carved into the backrest were the words, "For those still finding their way out of the woods." I ran my fingers over the letters. I knew who had sent it. No name required. Later that week, a letter arrived from Walter Reed. Jake. I remember everything now. The mission, the men, even the way Eli laughed when the generator failed, and we had to cook MREs with a cigarette lighter. The doctors say I'm lucky, but I don't think it was luck. I think I found the one trail in this world that led to someone who still believed in brothers. You didn't just save me. You reminded me who I was. Keep watching the ridge. You never know who's going to come stumbling out next. Mats. I read it twice. Then once more, just to feel the weight of those words settle in the quiet parts of me I don't show people. And that evening, I walked to the edge of the ridge. Snow had melted. Pines were reaching again. The wind whistled soft through the rocks. And I thought about how, sometimes, the only thing standing between a ghost and the rest of the world is one person who refuses to look away. So now, every time I lead a group down that trail, I pause near that bench. I let the silence settle. And I ask them the question that matters more than they know. Have you ever helped someone without knowing who they really were? Because sometimes the smallest act, a pause, a gesture, a night spent in the cold, can call a person back from where the world thought they were lost. And sometimes, that makes all the difference.